Welcome. I'm Claire Ponsford. I'm the director and owner of Wavelength International. We're a specialist medical recruitment business based in Australia. Today, I'm very lucky to be joined by two experts in their field. The first is Dr. Sachin Patel, who is a GP originally from the UK, who made the move to Australia back in 2008, initially to join a clinic in Melbourne, and has since then had a very illustrious career owning and running clinics himself, setting up an aged care GP business, a telehealth business, and most recently Scale My Clinic, which is a coaching business for GP practice owners, which he started in 2018 with Dr. Todd Cameron. So thank you, Sachin, for joining us today. I'm also joined by Jane Stanky, who is our senior talent advisor here at Wavelength, and Jane has worked in the GP recruitment space for about 15 years, I think, Jane, now. So is truly an expert in the field, putting GPs from all over the world into Australia. And she takes great pride in truly understanding motivations of the individual doctors and finding the right match and finding the right clinic. And it has placed, I believe, over about 400 GPs in her time. So quite a lot of conversations and journeys that she's been on with various doctors. So what we'll go through today, I'll just take you through an agenda. We'll cover off why Australia is actually attracting GPs now. What are the market conditions that mean that they are looking for GPs from overseas? What are the lifestyle, career, financial advantages associated with making the move? We'll give you a very high-level overview of the regulatory pathways and the migration pathways, and they're quite complex, so this will be a fairly high-level view, and we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So, Jane, I might hand over to you, and perhaps you can give us your opinion on why now.
Look, Australia's been experiencing a growing population for many years, but we're also having an aging population over here. People live longer. At the same time, we have an aging GP workforce in Australia. The RACGP actually ran a workforce insights report last year and found that almost 49% of GPs in Australia are over the age of 55. So there'll be a big round of, retirements coming soon, doctors, dropping down days, working part-time and retiring in the next 5 to 10 years. So we're really having an incongruent relationship between a growing population and a reduction in GP numbers. At the same time, GP training numbers are not keeping up with the demand. So Australia has to hire GPs from overseas. At the same time, we also have a maldistribution of GPs. There is a huge shortage of GPs in regional and rural areas in Australia, and there are lots of opportunities that present themselves for GPs coming into Australia at the moment. We've had a expedited specialist pathway introduced for GPs at the end of 2024, which we've been testing thoroughly over the last year, which is proving a lot faster, a lot more straightforward, a lot less paperwork heavy than any previous pathways we've had that allow GPs to hold very, very specific qualifications from specific countries within specific timeframes, which allows us to bring doctors, GPs into the country within a much shorter time frame now. So it's really a great time to be a GP coming to Australia. Patient demand is high, career development opportunities are becoming more and more attractive. Special interests are very much fostered in Australia, and that's something we can talk about in a little bit more detail later. Things I hear from GPs a lot, especially GPs who have moved from the UK, like Dr. Sachin, is that the clinical autonomy is much greater here than in the UK. And also really the attraction of Australia is, of course, the weather, the climate. For a lot of doctors coming from places like the UK, Ireland, where we spend a lot of the time of the year in the darkness. It's just such a lovely experience. I'm just in Australia at the moment. I'm usually based in the UK myself. Being able to wake up to sunshine in the morning consistently, it makes such a difference to your mood. And I feel that that's a big draw for a lot of doctors as well. So there are a lot of details that we can look at depending on each individual doctor's preferences. But things I hear a lot is also the actual clinical side of the work is very, very attractive. Paperwork requirements in Australia are a lot lower than in other countries, especially compared to places like the UK. And maybe Sachin can tell us a little bit more about that later. But there is a lot of feedback I'm having on the quality of service that GPs are able to provide here in Australia and the work satisfaction as well as the work-life balance.
Thank you. And Sachin, I know that having been here for such a long time, It may be hard to think back, maybe not, in terms of your particular motivations for relocating. And I know that some of you on the call may have many and varied motivations, whether it is about the work-life balance, whether it is about potentially higher earnings, family-friendly environment, etc. But Sachin, I know there's your own personal story, but also the stories of those that you've met along the way who also made the move. So I wonder whether you could perhaps share some of that.
Yeah, sure. Morning and evening, everyone. Just before I start and share, be fair, like Claire said, I came 18 years ago, came for a year, never left. Over the time, I've recruited 51 GPs into practices I've owned, and I've probably advised about 200 and something or helped other people who were thinking or making the move. And now I get time with about 120 owners across the country. And so when I share with you, I'm going to be blunt and direct. I've got no other motivation than to be helpful to you. Claire, your question was, what was my motivation and the motivation of others? I think it's really important. My story is weird in that I had a master plan. My master plan was to be a partner in a dispensing practice in or around Ipswich, because that's my football team. So my plan was to buy a big house there, have a dispensing practice, have my season ticket, and life would be good. But life was pretty comfortable. So there's a show called Neighbours, Australian. I used to watch it in England. I don't watch it in Australia. I think it's finished. But we used to be home every day by the time Neighbours was on, which was 5:37 p.m. And so we thought, before we move, we'll just shake things up a bit because it's a bit comfortable before we settle down. So we'll just go to Australia for a year and then come back and live out that master plan. At the same time, there was quite a lot of political stuff going on around fat cat GPs, the £250,000 GP. It was around the GFC time. It was just a bit unpleasant from a political environment. And so I needed to be out of that, even though I was a massively staunch defender of the NHS and general practice in the NHS. And so that was my reason. People I've met along the way have some have been financial reasons. Most of the time, it's been quality of life reasons, and quality of life composed of money, more time or quality of time for self and pursuits and interests and better weather to be able to spend more time outdoors, etc. And then the other is loved ones and family, spending more quality time and creating memories with family. That's been the main drivers that I've seen, as well as professional satisfaction. And so I think the big thing I've noticed is those that have been most successful in making the move have been really clear on why they're making the move and have spent time discussing, not just with themselves, but with their loved ones, or whoever you're coming with, about why you're moving and being really specific about that, because then once you're specific about that, you're more likely to find the opportunity that meets that reasoning that you're looking for. And that's what I've observed.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from you, Jen?
I think, look, Sachin, you absolutely hit the nail on the head. I speak with doctors every day who are contemplating the move. Some are sitting on packed bags, ready to go. Others are just, mulling it over, thinking there might be something better out there. And getting to the bottom of that why is so important. Really finding out for yourself what you want to achieve with that move is the first thing you want to be doing, because when you know what you're looking for, then you can find it. And we can help you find it. And I think everyone is different. Everyone wants to achieve different things with their career, with their life, and with this move. And once you have really drilled down to the bottom of what am I trying to achieve here, being able to articulate that is super useful, because then we can go and we can make that happen for you.
Another question that I think we get asked a lot, and I think there are often some surprises in terms of, particularly if you are in somewhere like UK or Ireland, surprises in terms of understanding the differences with the Australian health system, and a lot of questions about, is the clinical practice different? What is the funding model? Everyone hears the term Medicare, hears about bulk billing versus private billing, but what is that? And also, what is the technology that supports your ability to practice as a GP in Australia? Is it different from the UK? What patient management systems are out there? What's the rate of telehealth adoption, etc.? Sachin, can you perhaps give a view on that and your experiences of how much it differs?
There's probably the belief or the worries and the reality. So I remember back in the day when I was thinking about it, I was thinking, oh my God, I'm going to the other side of the world. I'm going to be dealing with snake bites, spider bites, like crocodile attacks, kangaroo punches. I don't know how I'm going to be dealing with all of this stuff. The reality is, like, you're dealing with humans, and the actual medicine is almost exactly the same. Okay, so that's the first thing to say, because we often will have unrealistic sort of fears and concerns about our own capability. What I would say is that clinical practice is far more GP-led, with assistance from nurses and multidisciplinary team, but the Australian system is far more doctor-led than the UK. Many of you will have found that a lot of your work has been sort of set off to other professionals, multidisciplinary team, and sometimes maybe the easy stuff has been palmed off and you're left feeling heavy and struggling with unrealistic expectations in short time frames with chronic disease patients. I don't know if that type of thing is what it feels like at times, that you're doing a lot of heavy work. The way it works here is that in the UK, we're used to capitation. And of course, you have QOF and incentives, etc. But if you're not a partner, essentially, you're either going to be on an hourly rate or a salaried sort of position, right? I think it's still the case. Is that fair to say? That's there. Here, it's quite different. It's slightly changing, but the main way you should think about it is fee for service. What that means is you get paid each time you do something. So if you see a patient, there's a fee attached to that. And so we used to have some families where, oh, while I'm here, my kid got sick this morning, could you see them? And you'd often resent that if that happened in the UK, because you're just trying to fit more work in less time. The difference here is that if you choose to say yes to that you would receive compensation for that. So that's a fee for service model. The way a fee for service model can work in Australia is two main ways. One is what's called bulk billing. What that means is there's a notional fee which is set by the government. It's an insurance system, so there's a rebate for each service that's provided. And so if you choose just to accept that government level of rebate in return for the service provided, that's known as bulk billing. Okay, so there's no additional payment from the patient. The alternative is private billing, where you choose to charge above the rebate offered by the government, and then the government rebates the patient that amount, but there's a gap or co-payment made by the patient. So that's the main ways to think about bulk billing and private billing. And there are a whole variety of services and what's known as item numbers, which attract different levels of rebates based on complexity of the service. But the main thing you need to know is the concept that effectively, the more you do it, the more efficiently you do it, then the better you earn. In terms of telehealth, since the pandemic, there's been a rise. Telehealth didn't really exist from GP to patient prior to the pandemic, but now does. It takes the form of telephony and video. It depends on the area and the practice as to how that's been adopted, but it is growing and a growing trend. The main question that I see people worry about, I don't know if it's still like this in the UK, is to come in the morning, go to my pigeonhole, and there used to be this pile of repeat prescriptions. Does that still happen, or some version of that? Yeah, and I just remember thinking that is a bloody nightmare. I'm just signing off, ticking things, giving it out. And there's all this work without the patient present, which seemed to take up an inordinate amount of time and an inordinate amount of risk. The good thing here is that you can choose, and it's the norm here, to do most of that work either with the patient present physically or through telehealth, so it's billable, or through an asynchronous channel, which is also billable. What that means is, I remember having days where I was maybe having 80 or 100 patient contacts, if you counted each of those scripts as a contact, which is just crazy. You just don't have that level of pressure here at all. And you, working with your practice owner that you work with, can set the systems for that, and working with your colleagues so that you can create ways of doing it that are sustainable and don't suck the living life energy out of you. So that's the way to think about it. What all this means is a basic tenet I had as a GP, I don't really practice now, is that, and I had this in the UK, I just wanted to treat the person who came to me like my family. I wanted my expectations for them was the same as if my family went to the doctor. I just wanted the best for the patients. What I found in the UK before I left is that I felt like I was spending 50% of my time trying to prevent people access the service that I was trained to give. I don't know if anyone can identify with any of that, but it just felt like there's this swathe of demand and I was just like holding the barricades up to just try and keep people behind. Here it's not like that. What I found is you can provide the service you want. You can normally access diagnostics and other services very quickly and easily, which means that you can get to diagnosis quickly. And then based on the resources of the person, if they need further treatment in secondary care, they can go through the public system or the private system. But there's just way more autonomy for you, more choice for the patient, and I think better outcomes. And I think all the data shows that the system performs better for patients. So that's an overview from my perspective, and hopefully that gives you a bit of a snapshot.
Thanks, Sachin. I'm focusing in on the sort of fee for service model. How much of a shift of mindset do you think that is for most GPs coming across to Australia? And typically, how long does it take to grasp it and be able to work it well to the benefit of both patients and also your own earning potential?
That depends. I'm just smiling to myself because the biggest risk to all of that is yourself, believe it or not. So I remember getting here, I came into this practice and I'm like, oh, a patient needs a repeat prescription. I'm not going to make them come in. I'm not going to make them do anything. I'm just going to do it. So I started implementing what I'd been brainwashed in the UK in my practice. And at some point I must have slapped myself or someone may have slapped me and like, what are you doing? And I was like, yeah, what am I doing? I'm just making my life a misery because people don't expect it that way. And the first thing I would say is there will be some rethinking and re-education of self required, and you just need to be open to that. I just think it's important to say that. I think in my experience, this is where the time to sort of competence and then time to optimization are two different timelines. The things that will affect that, and this is why you need to be really clear on why you're moving and pick the right practice for you to go to, because in my experience, people often get seduced by some carrot that's been dangled by a practice. Maybe they may talk about percentages, they may talk about dollar amounts. What I would be choosing on is the humans that are going to be in that practice and your feeling of connection with those people, because when you're in the right environment, they will provide the support to get you time to competence with billing, and then they will work with you on time to optimization, and you will not find it stressful, you will find it supported. And so I giggle to myself when I see these Facebook posts where people say, I've been offered this percentage, is it a good deal? And I'm like, there's no context there. You need to be thinking about the humans you're going to be with and their actual willingness to care for you. And the types of red flags that I've heard are, if you're having conversations like, how many patients can you see in an hour? How many hours can you work? I'd be a bit concerned about that. If you're hearing, hey, tell me about you, tell me about your family, what are you interested in? You know, what do you want out of your time in Australia? How do you want a day to look? You know, what do you like? What do you not like about what you do? Those types of things, and you're probably thinking about the right place. And then in terms of timelines, when it works well, I think you'll have a base understanding with lots of questions, probably 1 month. You'll feel comfortable and settled with just the billings, probably 3 months. And optimization from there will be an ongoing process, probably somewhere between 6 to 18 to 36 months, depending on your career path and how you start to expand services and offerings that you have. The ideal is you're in an environment where the practice works with you and is continually improving how they go about doing things, because that gives you agency and license to be involved. But you know, they'll direct, but you'll be involved and they'll take your input, and then you'll have a really good experience if you pick the right place.
Great, thank you. And I guess that sort of bleeds into more broadly the working conditions, lifestyle. And Jane, perhaps you can provide us with some of your experiences of clinics that you've worked with and what they're able to offer GPs.
Again, all this goes back to, as Sachin said earlier, your motivations. What are you trying to get out of this move? Because is it more the lifestyle component? Do you want to go to the beach in the morning before you go to work? You know, do you want to be able to take your kids to school, pick them up after school? Is it more about, you know, developing your career? Are there any special interests you'd like to pursue that you just don't have the opportunity to do at the moment where you are? Because again, this is something that's very much fostered in Australia. Special interests are very much encouraged in general practice. And this will very much depend on the practice you choose and the patient base that practice services. Because of course, you know, you may find yourself in an area where there's a lot of retirees and older people, so there might be a lot more chronic disease management and more complex health issues, palliative care possibly. If you're interested in nursing homes, you know, that might be another opportunity to pursue, which is also, you know, very well paid. Other things, you know, you might want to think about are, of course, you know, always the dermatology questions. We get that a lot. Skin cancer is still a big subject in Australia, and here the patients are encouraged to go and see their GP for skin checks. Meanwhile, in the UK, I've been going to specialists privately to get my skin checks done. That's not the case here in Australia. You know, a lot of GP practices will have GPs that are very highly trained in dermatology, and there are further qualifications you can gain here in Australia, and that will allow you to practice and do, you know, more complex dermatology procedures. Even I have some doctors who quite a high level skin cancer surgery on the face, on the angles, skin flaps, grafts. You know, there's a lot more opportunity to develop a special interest here in Australia. So that's also something maybe worth thinking about, something you actually really enjoy that you might not get the opportunity to pursue at the moment. Because then again, we can work backwards from that and help you find a practice that can help you establish that. Another thing to think about is where you might like to see yourself. Now, it's a very classic knee-jerk reaction almost to think, oh, I've heard of Sydney and Melbourne. Let's look at Sydney and Melbourne. But Australia is so much more than just Sydney or Melbourne. There are so many beautiful locations you might never even have thought about, still offer all the lifestyle opportunities that you might be after, that you might just not be aware of. And Sydney and Melbourne are beautiful and lovely, but we also have to be mindful of the fact that there is a requirement in Australia to work in an area of shortage for your specialty for the first 10 years when you arrive in Australia. For general practice, these areas are defined as so-called distribution priority areas. You may have heard about this and have come across this in your research, the DPA areas, which are reviewed by the government regularly to make sure that areas that, you know, are being flagged for international GPs are still high demand areas. And it's really easy to fall into kind of a trap of thinking, oh God, 45 minutes from A or B is very far out, and that's rural. The distances in Australia are a completely different ball game. I think people travel a lot further here than we would in the UK. And it's really interesting how the moment you arrive in Australia, an hour and a half is nothing. You do that to see your friend and then you come back home. So thinking about locations with a bit maybe of a broader mindset and with a bit more of an open mind, and maybe considering some of those less beaten paths, I suppose, because there is a huge demand in more regional areas, and there are some beautiful locations that you could live in and you could just have the most gorgeous lifestyle. I'm just going to throw some random names out there that you may never have heard about, but you know, Port Macquarie, gorgeous, camels on the beach, you know, Hervey Bay sailing, you know, you could be in your pool at lunchtime because the practice is just 10 minutes down the road. So you could take an hour off at lunch and go for a little swim. So there are just some things that are worth being a bit more flexible on and maybe a bit more open-minded and doing more research before you make a decision on where exactly you're going to go. Maybe coming over to Australia for a look. I mean, I can't encourage that enough. A lot of GPs, you know, won't have the time. I know it's really hard to get the time off in the UK, but obviously if you have the opportunity, come over, have a look, you know, actually have a little holiday, bring the family, see where they actually light up and where you're having a nice experience. And that is something that I definitely encourage. Again, of course, beaches, outdoors, active living. Australia just offers so many opportunities to be more outdoorsy. You just have a lot more daytime hours that are, you know, light and sunny, and you can just get up to much more. And, you know, what do you enjoy? Are you someone who likes to ride their bike? You know, do you like to go dirt biking? Are you someone who likes hiking? Is it more about the swimming, the beaches? Are you a surfer? Do you like skiing? Australia has ski fields, would you believe it? That's also something that a lot of doctors are interested in. Have a think about, as they say, what fills your cup, you know, what makes you happy outside of work as well as within work, because both go hand in hand, and we can definitely approach your search from both angles, both the professional side and the lifestyle, personal and family side of things. So again, working out what you're trying to achieve with the move is going to be really, really important to have the best experience at the end.
Thanks, Jane. Sachin, what were the lifestyle changes that you noticed when you first moved across?
Found it super friendly, which I know sounds weird, but people were like really welcoming and open. Just the openness of the average human. You didn't feel you had to be guarded, like as a GP in the UK. Felt like you had to be quite guarded. The other most notable thing is I still feel in the UK from the Victorian times, there's still that kids should be seen and not heard. And what I noticed here, I didn't have kids at the time, but I remember there was a news story when a pub or a restaurant had not let kids in. It was actually on the evening news. And I was like, yeah, that's the type of place I want to be, where, you know, kids are our future. We need to look out for them. So I really enjoyed that part. The other part was for us, like the variety of weather, landscapes, activities that were just within, you know, we moved to Melbourne at the time and I was in outer Melbourne, but I used to drive, like Jane was just talking about, against traffic. I'd live further in and drive out. It was pretty easy. But what we also noticed is just, yeah, within hour and a half to 2 hours, you could be at the beach, or you could be in the snow, or you could be in the mountains walking. which was pretty cool. And then the other stuff, we like sports, food, the arts, and all of those things are extremely accessible. Like I remember, I never went to Wimbledon in the UK because you had to enter a lottery to get a ticket, or you'd have to queue overnight and do all those crazy things, and I wasn't doing that. Here, you could just, we just finished the Australian Open, easily accessible. You could get tickets even for the main matches like a couple of days before. If you want to go to the cricket, bang, you can. And flying from one place to another to watch cricket. I've been to Sydney for a day just to watch the cricket, stayed the night, come home. It's so accessible and easy. Those were the things. It was just like a different world, the ability to go and do that. For us, it was like a little bit of a playground, to be honest. Like, you're just like, oh, you can do that. And then when you start doing those things, you start to think a bit differently about life. I think it just opens up the way you approach life. And so then you just become a bit more adventurous, I think a bit keener to take more things on. Those were the things I've noticed. And people who've spoken to since and who I've helped and friends of mine who've made the move all say similar things. The other big one that's come through, we moved pre-kids, but I've had friends who've since moved with kids. They said in the UK, this is the big thing that's come through. One of the things for them was that they felt their kids were on a treadmill in the UK, in that, they're starting at 7, 8, 9 tuition, trying to get into grammar schools or selective education or whatever. And it's their words, not mine, like a bit of a rat race. And they just didn't want their kids to go through that. They wanted a better childhood for their children. They've been super happy, those that have come here, just to cast that off, and their kids get a whole different type of experience with outdoor opportunities, different environment at school, and just a better lifestyle for them as a family to enjoy as they grow as a family. So that's been a clear message that's come through from all of the people that have come, that I've spoken to.
Thank you. All right, we might now move on to an area that is often a mystery for those people that aren't familiar with the system in Australia, and it can be confusing and quite complex. And we certainly recommend that you partner with somebody that understands the process and what's required. So Jane, I might just ask you to give, and this will be a very high level overview. We could talk for another hour, I think, or more about this in detail, but just to give you a sense of what the actual pathways are, what the steps are, timelines, documentation, that kind of thing. So Jane, could you take us through that?
Yes, really, as you say, there's so many different pathways, and it can be so confusing when you first look at, oh God, where do I start? You open the AMC website, maybe I've had a look at the AHPRA website, and it can be very overwhelming. So maybe first things first, of course, the best thing to do is find an experienced advisor who can have a look at your CV and let you know exactly which pathways are an option for you, because it's easy to get wrong because there are so many ifs and buts. And if you hold this qualification, but not that qualification, it can be quite confusing. So really just, as Claire said, a very high level overview. We have two specialist pathways for GPs in Australia. We have the college pathway, the RACGP pathway, and the AHPRA pathway. AHPRA is the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency. Bit of a mouthful, but it's basically the equivalent, of the GMC or the New Zealand Medical Council, Irish Medical Council. Here in Australia, they're the registration body. So the AHPRA pathway is really the pathway we're recommending at the moment if you're able to go for it. It is quite a specific pathway because it only really encompasses doctors who hold very, very specific specialist GP qualifications. So we'll obviously have to have a look at that for you specifically. But if you do hold one of those specific qualifications, either from New Zealand, the UK or Ireland, the registration process is reasonably straightforward. You have to secure a position first because your registration will be done against that position, because you will be required to work under supervision initially. It's not intense supervision. It's nothing to do with someone sitting in the room with you or signing off on your patients, anything like that. But you will definitely get the support. You have someone you can shadow initially that does regular catch-ups with you, that you can ask questions. And you will need that supervision for the first 6 months on that AHPRA pathway. And you will be required to work at the specific practice that you've decided to join. So you will not be able to apply for that registration pathway without having secured a position. There's only so far you can get, and AHPRA will say, okay, we need the following documents from the practice, and it's supervisor plan, supervisor details, a whole lot of documents they have to fill in. But generally speaking, the AHPRA pathway itself only takes roughly, altogether including visas and the Medicare provider number that you will need to actually bill your patients in the end, around 6 months, we would say, if you're good with paperwork. Of course, if things take longer, if you need to request documents that you might not be able to find, I know that can sometimes happen, you'll need to add that time on. The college pathway is slightly more complex. That pathway you can start without having secured a position. The first step is to contact the college for what they call a comparability assessment, where they review your CV, your qualifications, your recency of practice. There's a whole thing they want to see. It's a much more comprehensive application, and then they will give you an assessment outcome, and they will either find you substantially comparable to an Australian trained GP, partially comparable or not comparable. That process alone takes roughly about 10 to 12 weeks. And once you got your outcome, you can then go and apply for positions in Australia with your outcome, because depending on the outcome you get from the RACGP, that will inform where you can work, because there are different requirements for substantially or partially comparable applicants. And the supervision requirements changed as well. Substantially comparable doctors usually only required to complete 6 to 12 months of supervision. Partially comparable doctors usually are required to complete anywhere, up to 2 years of supervision, and have to sit the fellowship exams at the end of that process. So quite a different pathway compared to the AHPRA pathway. Now, we've mentioned here PESCI and AMC exams. That is for doctors who don't hold specialist GP qualifications or come from countries where the qualifications aren't cross-recognized by the GP college. That involves writing an exam with the Australian Medical Council, which is a multiple choice question exam. And once you have then secured a position in Australia with your exam outcome, you then have to complete something called a PESCI, which is a panel interview, essentially, where you get, queried by a board and get, patient cases presented that you have to essentially assess as if you were working in the practice. It's quite a lengthy process, the AMC and PESCI process, and can be challenging. The PESCI exams aren't very easy. I know a lot of doctors ask, can I do the PESCI remotely? It's not something I recommend, because if your technology fails or they can't hear you very well, they will, likely fail you on the day. And it makes sense to go into the practice first, do a bit of shadowing, get a bit of an understanding of the types of patients they see, and get a bit of an idea of how the Australian medical practice works, because that's what the PESCI will check you against if you're required to complete a PESCI. But again, I can see the time. We're coming up to the Q&A section, so I don't want to talk too much. Visa options. The general visa that, every GP will be looking at initially is the so-called 482 temporary business visa that replaced the 457 visa that Sachin came on originally. The 482 visa doesn't have an age restriction. I get that question a lot. There's no age restriction for the 482 visa. This visa can be approved for up to 4 years, but it depends on the length of contract you sign. So the Department of Immigration will only ever approve your visa, your 482 visa, for the contract length that you provide. So if you sign a 2-year contract, you get a 2-year visa. If it's a 3-year contract, you'll get a 3-year visa. You can apply for multiple 482 visas at the end of the day. You don't have to become a permanent resident in Australia if you don't want to. However, there are different permanent residency options, and our dedicated migration team can, of course, advise you on those. There are different options depending on age. There is an age cutoff for one of the permanent residency options. However, there are other permanent residency visa options that offer an age waiver. So there is never an end to being able to become a permanent resident in Australia. I think a lot of doctors hear that, age 45 is the cutoff. Don't worry, you can get sponsored by your practice for permanent residency past the age of 45. It just takes a little bit longer. You have to have been working at the practice for 2 years before they're allowed to do that. If you work as a contractor, or if you work as an employee, they can sponsor you sooner. Again, very high level overview, and it really depends on personal circumstances, and we can discuss that in more detail if you like. We can always organize a call so we can speak one-on-one, look at your individual circumstances, your family requirements, and talk about this in more detail. And if there's an interest, Claire, maybe we'll even run a webinar on the registration pathways if that's of interest.
Yes, I think so. It is quite detailed and complex and very dependent on each individual's circumstances, but we can certainly go into a lot more detail if there's a need, and very happy to run a separate session. Just talking about the complexity of that process, what would you suggest that doctors should be aware of to try and reduce the delays and time that the process takes?
The number one thing that I'm going to say, you probably all expect me to say, that is find an experienced partner who can guide you through the process, because it's just so complex. And if you don't do it full time, if you're not a regulatory specialist, it's really easy to get kind of lost in the weeds, apply for the wrong pathway. I've just spoken with a doctor yesterday who's moved to Sydney and is waiting for her paperwork, and she's applied for the wrong pathway, unfortunately. So we'll just have to kind of untangle that and start again, and it's easily done. I've had other doctors come to me saying, I've tried to apply for registration for the last 2 years and it's just such a trek. And it's, all the documentation is so confusing. And obviously here at Wavelength, we've got our own dedicated regulatory team who help all of our doctors with their registration, who will sit with you, set up a Teams call and go through the documents with you, make sure that all the right boxes are ticked. You haven't accidentally forgot to tick a box. That also sometimes happen. It's so overwhelming. You've got all these stacks of forms to fill in. It's easy to forget to tick a box, and it can sometimes be something as small as that. So it's important to have someone who will look over that for you, who knows what they're looking out for, and who can make sure that your application is complete when you submit it, to save you time when it is being processed and to avoid you getting rejected somewhere along the line. Easy to do. It can be so confusing when you've never looked at this form before. So if you have someone who looks at these forms every day as a full-time job, they know exactly what to look for and let you know if there's anything that you might need to adjust. Equally, visa requirements can be a bit confusing. Health concerns, that's always important to discuss. It can be as simple as, I've got a bit of asthma. Is that something I need to raise? And that's all discussions that our migration agent can have with you. We've got a dedicated migration agent on our team who can talk you through all the different visa options and help you navigate your long-term visa plans as well as your immediate work visa, and making sure that your partner can work and things like that are so important, and we can cover all of that with you.
Thanks, Jane. I realise that we're getting very close to time, and I want to make sure that we give you all enough time for some questions. As Jane said, Wavelength has a full service. There are also other options out there for you that will help with relocation, will help with assistance with housing, with schools, etc. So do seek out some additional expertise and assistance with exploring the move. Let's move to our Q&A section. I do have a particular question from a doctor, and it was really just diving into earning potential and wanting an honest comparison between, say, a London salary and a Melbourne salary, as an example. So minimum gross salary in Australian dollars rather than percentage of billings. And I think this comes back to Sachin's comment, is that without context, when you see a role that's advertised as offering 65% of billings, 70% of billings, whatever it is, it's meaningless, really. So this question is comparing total earning potential in Australia versus what you might get in the UK, which is a full salary, because it's a salaried role. You'd potentially get your pension, NHS pension on top of that, and you also get your paid leave. So if you're comparing that to salary and pension, which equates to perhaps £120,000, and you're getting your paid leave in that. How does that compare? And Sachin, I might just throw to you in terms of what you've seen and how best to sort of make that comparison.
2 bits to say to that. In terms of earning potential, it really depends on where you go and the practice that you work with and the way the practice is set up and the way the practice works with you. That's going to have a big impact on the way that you grow and develop your earnings. The bits I would say, the figures you quoted were 120,000, including the pension.
Yes, I think it was 100,000 was the salary component, and yeah. I think the pension on top was,
So 20-ish, and then maybe 5 weeks leave or something like that. That would end up being about 250 to 275 Australian dollars, something like that. It's eminently possible to surpass that, without doubt. What I would say is, my big warning is that you shouldn't focus on money when making the move. I know it's important, but there's different earnings that you can receive. So there's financial earnings, but there's also time and life energy earnings that you can't really put just a figure on. And almost universally, the people who have had the worst experiences that I've observed made decisions based on money and percentages. And so the types of conversations you want to have with whichever place you end up at are about having more sustainable and enjoyable work and environment, because once you've got that, you will fly. If that practice is happy to work with you to develop you and help you develop your earning potential. So it's really choose carefully and have really detailed conversations and make sure you're assessing them as well as they're assessing you. It's a mutual assessment. And that's why you've got to be really clear on why, because if you're moving for money alone, you may miss some of the other elements which make the move awesome. But if it's a risk mitigation thing that I'm worried, it feels like I'm on a good wicket. And if I make the move, then maybe I'm throwing what I've got away. It's pretty hard. Like, over the time, I recruited 51 GPs. Only 3 ever went back. So there's earnings and there's price. And there's a price of change, but there's a price of regret. I've seen people now who've spoken to me for 15 years, some of my best friends, about, oh, should I come? And now they're living in a moment and the price of regret, some of those. But they'll just happily console themselves that I can't have it any different. So that sounds a bit strange, but I just can't stress enough that, yes, your earnings, you'll probably surpass. But the thing that will probably surpass most is your enjoyment of what you do. That's been my experience almost universally. As long as you take time and select the right practice that is linked to why you want to move and has the right ingredients of human or leader or leaders in that practice that are there to help you make a successful transition. And I know, because I don't own practices anymore, so I've got nothing to sell you. But when I brought someone or was involved in helping someone migrate here, I took great responsibility and interest in making sure not only was it a professionally successful transition, but it was a personally successful transition in terms of, giving you access to all the information I had and connections in my area so that it was easier for you to find the right house, the right school, the right restaurants, the right car insurance, the right car supply, like whatever. That's what you want to look for, because that is what will help you have the best experience if you've got someone who genuinely cares, aside from who you come with. The other thing I'd just like to say is a couple of pitfalls in this whole thing, if that's okay. Because again, I've spoken to a lot of people over the time and I've got no connection to Wavelength apart from I have high respect and regard. I came with Wavelength, had the best experience, but I've worked with some other agencies and I've also seen some of the sharks out there. I would just say you just have to be very careful. There are a subset of people who just want the transaction. So they will just say to you, yeah, you should go to that practice. They're great. Just sign up. Off you go. And, one of the people I was talking about earlier who came with kids, him and his wife had come here on a reconnaissance mission. I didn't know the guy. We just had mutual acquaintances. They said, oh, can you speak to this guy? I met with him. He's telling me about these practices, which, they should have had flashing blue and red sirens while he was telling me. It was, obvious they were not good places to go to at this point for an international graduate. That may change in the future, but at that point it was not a good place to be because it just wasn't set up. You could just tell listening to the story. But this person was being pressured to just sign up, take one of them, just go. That's not correct, because there are 2 groups of people. There are some that will work for the transaction and there are others that will work for your success because they're building a reputation based on sustainable success for the work that they do. And so you just got to be careful about promises that are made and where you take advice. So there's Facebook groups, which are great, useful to get tidbits, but you just got to wonder when people are giving advice, what is the hidden agenda? They're just things I would bear in mind. I hope that gives you some insight. I've seen people earn after their service fee to the practice, so their retained sort of percentage. I've seen full-timers earning 150 Australian dollars, and I've seen full-timers earning 750. So there's a big window there, and it's all dependent on a whole host of things. But no amount of money is worth working somewhere that you hate going to every day. But it is entirely possible that you could find a place where you're earning beyond your wildest dreams and it doesn't feel like work. Entirely possible if you follow those things that I just shared. Seriously, there are moments you'll think, if you've picked the right place, did I go to heaven or something, or whatever my version of that is. It's like that at certain points. But it takes time to get there, and there's going to be a bit of pain of change. That's normal. There's got to be a bit of change when you make some change. With the right supports, the right help around you, your chances of it being the good result are way higher. And that's all it's about. It's about stacking the odds in your favor.
Thanks, Sachin. Jane, I've just seen another question here, and it's about visas. And we should preface this by saying that our migration agent isn't actually on the call today, so we can certainly ask her to answer this in more detail and send the response to this group. But do you have a high-level view on the question that Jahangir Shah has asked, which is, when going on a skilled visa, does that affect things like applying for mortgages, eligibility for Medicare, etc.?
Interestingly, there are obviously answers that a financial advisor would probably be best off giving, and we can put you in touch with someone. Again, as Claire mentioned earlier, we have a whole network of specialists in different fields we can put you in touch with. We've got insurance advisors who can help with indemnity, health insurance, things like that. In terms of mortgages, a financial advisor would be the best person to speak with about that. I am aware that you can absolutely get a mortgage on a temporary business visa, on a 482 visa, but the rates are just better if you're a permanent resident. You just get access to better rates. That's really the difference. Eligibility for Medicare, if you're a UK citizen, you're going to be eligible for Medicare anyway. Regardless, you will still be required to take out private health insurance in Australia on the 482 visa. I do recommend private health insurance in Australia. It's a completely different game compared to the UK. I have to say the UK private health insurance is a bit of a minefield. In Australia, it's really easy. It's, you do the meerkat thing and you find your insurance and so many things you can exclude, include whatever you need, and you can use it every day. When you go to the GP, you can use it. When you go to the physio, you can use it. The claiming process is really, really easy. So private health insurance is something even after I was no longer on the 482 visa and I didn't need the private health insurance anymore, theoretically, I still kept it up because it's actually really beneficial. So you will be able to apply for Medicare as a UK citizen because that's, a cross-recognized country, but you will still need the private health insurance top up anyway for the 482 visa.
Okay, thank you. Look, I realise we've run over time. It feels like we've only skimmed the surface of what the information that we can provide you with. So by all means, if any of you have any questions that pop into mind, you have the email address of Ilham that sent you the registration link. So please drop any questions to that email and we'll endeavour to answer them. And Jane can also be available for a one-on-one consultation if you just like to have a general conversation about what she's seeing in the market, what potential opportunities there are out there for you that might match your needs. You can reach out to Jane as well. Sorry, Sachin?
When you finish, I had one last thing to finish with.
Oh, okay. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. I realise you've all had busy days and you've had your dinner and then had to log on and you probably feel like it's time for bed. So thank you very much for joining us. I hope you found it useful. Sachin?
The question about, mortgages and buying a house, etc. All I would say is obviously what Jane said goes, but beyond that, once you're settled here and established, the way you are treated by institutions such as lending institutions is on a different level to what you would experience in the UK. It's going to sound a bit pompous and I don't mean it like that, but you're a doctor, you've worked damned hard to get to where you're at professionally, and it should not be that difficult to get access to borrowing to buy the house that you want to live in. Like, let's be honest. I've seen in the UK, I've got friends, my sister is a dentist, the hoops she had to jump through. Here, you're treated on a completely different level. So once you're established, it's literally like a different world at the moment.
That's right. Actually, many of the banks have healthcare divisions that are solely focused on providing support to doctors, healthcare professionals, both in your personal life and in your professional life in terms of investing in clinics, buying buildings for clinics, etc. There's a number of different providers and we could certainly help with putting you in touch with some of them just to see what they can offer. All right. Thanks for that, Sachin. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Have a good evening.
Take action. Make the move.